On the Black Tower Show, we have Richard Miniter, investigative journalist and author of 2 New York Times best-selling books, Losing Bin Laden and Shadow War. Our guest on the Black Tower Show, Richard Miniter, thank you for taking the time out to talk to us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be with you. I should say that my new book, Leading from Behind, is my 3rd New York Times bestseller.
Boom! I like that.
Bam.
Congratulations.
Hey, it's better than a sharp stick in the eye, isn't it?
Yeah. It's good work if you can get it, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But I want to talk to you about sort of the recent, these stories that are coming out about bin Laden's death. We have kind of revisions on what actually happened. What is going on here? What's your view on this sort of this new revisionist history that's happening now?
Well, I think the White House raced out the story of bin Laden's death too soon. I think President Obama announced the death of bin Laden within hours after his body was thrown from the deck of the USS Carl Vincennes, the aircraft carrier in the Indian Ocean. And so hours later, he told the entire world bin Laden was dead. And as a result, the media descended on the White House and wanted to hear the story. And the White House told a story of what happened, but they didn't have a chance to get all their ducks in a row, all their facts right. And they've had to revise that official story a number of times. I mean, first they said there was a 40-minute firefight. Then they said, well, actually, no, all the shooting was over in about 6.5 minutes. They said that women were used as human shields, and that didn't turn out to be the case. And now one of the SEALs who was involved in the raid actually says that bin Laden was unarmed. Now, I think the White House put out the story that bin Laden was going for a gun when he was shot for legal reasons. They were afraid that either the SEALs or the president or someone on the president's team would be indicted for murder or for some criminal offense. And so it was a hyper interest in legality that was probably driving some of this. But a lot of it, frankly, was just disorganization. And that's why usually when other White Houses make announcements, they wait a few days and make sure that they've got all the details right.
So, I mean, you are the authority on this issue as far as I'm concerned. I mean, your book, Losing Bin Laden, which is the result of 18 months of reporting, Cairo, Frankfurt, I mean, you've seen it. So you would say that what's happening now is just sloppy work? Is that what people should believe?
Well, I think some of it's sloppiness, and some of it, frankly, is politics, right? I mean, if you're looking for foreign policy accomplishments of President Obama, this is it. I mean, there's really, maybe the end of the regime of Muammar Gaddafi is a second runner-up, but that's it. I mean, the rest of the world is, frankly, a mess. I mean, the European Union is in crisis. The euro is about to collapse. Greece and Italy and Spain and Ireland are in financial jeopardy. South America has real problems. The Middle East is worse than usual. There's really, if you look around the world, there's really no happy region that is the result of Obama's policies. So if you're looking at foreign policy for this president, the only positives you've got is that, bin Laden is dead. So they're really pushing that hard. The problem is the facts don't line up with some of their political appeals. I mean, the president who wants to bring his campaign wants to present this as a gutsy call, but in fact, in my book, Leading from Behind, I show that he stopped or stalled the planning 3 separate times in 2011 alone. So there was a lot of political calculation here. Valerie Jarrett, his principal advisor and his longtime mentor, was opposed to the bin Laden raid because she saw it as enormous political risk. She thought it would be another Desert One type situation. If you remember, back in 1980, President Carter tried to rescue the 52 American diplomats held hostage in the capital of Iran, and those 2 aircraft collided at the rendezvous point, killing several servicemen. And that tragic ending was really kind of a pivot in Carter. After that, the president looked ineffective, feckless, weak, and Valerie Jarrett was
Our guest on the Black Tower Show, Richard Miniter. Unfortunately, you're cracking up a little bit. He's an investigative journalist and author of 2 New York Times. Well, 3 now, actually. So are you coming through? You're sounding like you're cracking up.
I think we've lost him.
I think we've lost him. We've lost him. Technical difficulties. It does happen. We're going to try to get him back on the line. Richard Miniter talking about what's going on with bin Laden, the different stories that are coming out. from the White House? Is it sloppy political work? How much of it is politics? And he was starting to paint a pretty bleak picture there of where we're headed. So Richard Miniter, he was cracking up, but we're going to get him back on the show. So we got line 2. Richard Miniter, sorry about the technical difficulties. Are you there now?
I'm here, yes.
All right. So let's continue back to where were we?
Valerie Jarrett. I read an article the other day in The Hill, and it made me think, how powerful is this Valerie Jarrett woman? When there was a press briefing they were doing, and a reporter asked a question about drone strikes, and she immediately called off the whole press briefing, and it was over immediately. How much power does this woman have?
I think Valerie Jarrett's power is enormous, and it's hard to overestimate it, right? I mean, she's technically an advisor to the president on intergovernmental affairs, whatever that is. But, Valerie Jarrett has been the president's mentor and the first lady's mentor since 1991, ever since they met for dinner at La Loupe Cafe in Chicago. She's been guiding both of their careers. She's gotten Michelle Obama every important job she's had since 1991, including her highest paid job at the University of Chicago Medical Center, where she was paid more than $300,000 a year to be director of community outreach. And that job was so important that as soon as she left to be first lady, the hospital abolished the job and didn't hire anybody to replace her. Valerie, it was sat on the board of the University of Chicago Medical Center at the time. Valerie's gotten her every important job. And then if you look at her role with Barack Obama, she worked on every campaign. She introduced him to a lot of his key staff, and really guided his political career every step of the way. So this is someone who both the president and the first lady owe their careers to, their professional lives to, incredibly indebted to her. And Barack Obama described Valerie Jarrett's role in the administration in the New York Times back in 2009 this way. He said, quote, "I never make an important decision without talking to Valerie first." And he said he talks to her 2 to 3 times a day. That's an enormous amount of influence.
Wow.
There's simply she's just not an ordinary advisor. I'll leave it to you this way. She goes on vacation with the first family. Can you imagine Henry Kissinger going on vacation with Richard Nixon?
I was just imagining Henry Kissinger in a bathing suit.
Yeah, that would
that's
be
she not only can call off press conferences when she wants to, but she was also allegedly called off the Bin Laden raid 3 different times. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I have in my book, Leading from Behind, where I look at Valerie's role in calling off the Bin Laden raid. And she has influence on any area of politics or policy she wants. She has no predefined area. She can talk about anything she wants, and the president listens.
All right. Our guest on the Black Tower Show, Richard Miniter, investigative journalist, author of 3 New York Times best-selling books. I have a question. You wrote in Losing Bin Laden, you suggest that the appointment of Richard Clarke on May 22nd, 1998, as the government's first coordinator of the counterterrorism efforts that were dispersed to 40 agencies, quote, could have been the beginning of the end of Al-Qaeda. I'm wondering, what do you say to people that say that the U.S. is working with Al-Qaeda in different countries and our allies?
I think that's a laughable assertion. I mean, Al-Qaeda is an organization that is ideologically opposed to the United States in almost any form. The attempt the CIA and other U.S. intelligence agencies have had to try to get people inside Al-Qaeda has usually resulted in those agents' deaths. I mean, there's kind of a powerlessness in the Arab world that leads to paranoia. And there's the idea that since we're not defeating someone, we must be working with them. I mean, you hear these kind of paranoid theories in our world a lot. That, we must be working with the Iranians because we don't stop them from building a bomb. and they don't seem to understand the constraints that are on us. The U.S., there's certain things the U.S. simply can't do, either as a matter of constitution or as a matter of morality or as a matter of our unique politics. But I just think the idea that the United States is working with Al-Qaeda is laughable. And let's also not forget what happened on 9/11.
Right.
Any politician who worked with the group that carried out that would be politically dead.
Right.
Well, I would like to ask you this question: what do you make of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, which is a UN-designated Al-Qaeda affiliate, working with the Free Syrian Army? That's a close association, though.
Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Did we lose him? We lost. We lost our guest on the Black Tower show, Richard Miniter. He may have hung up on us that way. This could be. Call him back up and see if he wants to keep talking to us. We don't know. We're trying to get down to the truth here, guys. We don't know. We don't know if the U.S. and Al-Qaeda are working together. We hope not. But Richard Miniter, he has his opinions. Investigative journalist, author of 3 New York Times best-selling books. Richard Miniter. We're broadcasting 1590 AM WASB, Brockport, Rochester, 1310 AM WRSB, Canandaigua, Rochester. If you'd like to call in to me or Jake, the number's 585-637-7040. You're listening to the Black Tower show. So we're going to try again. 3's a charm. 3 is a charm. Technical difficulties. What's going on today? Richard Miniter, our guest on the Black Tower show. Let's try this again. Are you there, sir?
I'm here. I'm so sorry about that. Let's blame AT&T, the world's worst phone company.
They don't want us to know. They don't want us to be having this conversation.
I guess
Right.
not.
All right. So one thing I want to get your feedback on is NDAA. We talk about it a lot on the show. Where do you come out on NDAA? Is it a necessary mechanism of our government, or is it overreaching and essentially stealing away people's liberties? Where do you come out on it?
Well, what is the acronym you're using?
NDAA, National Defense Authorization.
Oh, of course.
Right.
Look, generally my view is that a lot of the bureaucratic things that the federal government is doing are things that the bureaucracy has wanted to do for years or decades, that they're using 9/11 or other terrorist threats as an excuse to do the things they've long wanted to do. Okay? For example, the searches at airports. That
Right.
Once you go down this philosophical line that you want to search people's possessions rather than search for search for dangerous minds. You want to search for dangerous objects. You end up with an insane TSA series of controls like we have today. And that doesn't make sanctions. And I'm not a believer in racial profiling not because I consider it immoral, but because I think it doesn't work, right? You end up, if you were searching all Arab males, you would end up searching millions of people who are non-threatening to anyone. And, while the subjects of those searches might understand why they're being searched, you're simply wasting everyone's time. And more importantly, you're tiring out the searchers. And you create what's called search fatigue, where if you have people look at, guards or whatever, look at people who are not really suspects, they just fit some profile. Right. That means when they do get to someone they should be looking at closely, they're tired. They're not picking up on all the details. So there's a real cost to what they call false positives. Instead, we should be looking at people who we know have a relationship with Al-Qaeda. That is to say, people who've received phone calls or made phone calls to Al-Qaeda. And, the FBI maintains a database with some 188,000 names worldwide of people who have made or received calls from known Al-Qaeda figures. People who shared a lease, people who shared a bank account, people who shared a utility bill somewhere in the world with a known Al-Qaeda figure. And those are the people you focus on. Well, of the roughly 3.5 million people every day who move through the nation's airports, if you could if you looked at it, if you narrowed that to just 188,000 people, that means most of us could go through an airport like walking across the street, totally unmolested, unsearched. But the security state wants to look.
Right.
It wants the jobs created from looking, and it also wants to look, and it wants to decide what you can carry on and not carry on an aircraft.
It's an interesting point that you made.
It likes those pinch points.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point that the policy is focusing on the actual things that we're carrying on as opposed to the people. I mean, I know that seems very, very obvious difference there, but if you really think about it, it's an interesting point. We shouldn't be focusing on the materials that we're bringing on. But then, when you start, like you said, you're not in favor of racial profiling. But that avenue creates a lot more arguments, a lot more dissent, and people feel very passionately about giving up certain liberties and et cetera, et cetera. So that's where the debate gets a little weird. But thinking about it that way is good, that we're focusing too much on the actual materials. But Jake Fox, did you want to elaborate?
Too much on it. Look, if a law-abiding person carries on a fully loaded machine gun, they're not a risk. If somebody with a terrorist mindset is on a sharpened pencil, they could use that in a deadly way, and they are a risk. It's what's in your mind, not what's in your hand, that makes you dangerous.
Right.
Rich Miniter, you have a very keen insight into this administration. You've written a very informative book about it, and I wanted to get your take on what do you make of this Bibi, Netanyahu, Obama kind of face-off over Netanyahu's visit to the United States. Obama said he declined to see Netanyahu. Netanyahu basically called Obama a liar and said that he never requested to see Obama. What sort of tensions are going on there, do you think?
Well, I think, as I detail in my book, Leading from Behind, Obama was ideologically opposed to the ruling Likud party in Israel for decades. He has an ideological agenda at the far left of American politics on this. I mean, I don't think Obama's an extremist on every issue, but I think on Israel, given his personal history, he really is on the extreme, and it's not in a good way. I mean, it's we see here that one of the people who really shaped him was Edward Said. I found 3 handwritten letters where Barack Obama had written to Edward Said, who was then a Columbia literature professor, probably the world's most famous Palestinian activist. But more importantly, his long-term relationship with Rabbi Wolf, who had repeatedly written in favor of an independent Palestinian state as early as 1973. He wrote an infamous article, Rabbi Wolf did, saying that Jews should stop talking about the Holocaust in 1979. And this is in the midst of an enormous cultural awakening where, the U.S. was finally starting to talk about the uglier side of World War II. It wasn't just D-Day landings and VE Day celebrations. Right. There were Nazi death camps, and this is what the human suffering was like. And just as that conversation was starting, and the American public was really being educated about the Holocaust, the Holocaust TV series, up pops Rabbi Wolf saying, no, don't talk about it anymore. He really wanted to minimize the suffering of the Jews and really change the focus onto the suffering of the Palestinians. And this is a neighbor and a longtime friend of Barack Obama, who raised money for Barack Obama's first campaign and for every political campaign afterward. And Rabbi Wolf really guided him in his intellectual understanding of Israel. So he really got to see Israel through this very obscure keyhole, not through the average, not through the window of everyday perception, but through this ideological lens. And it made it very difficult for him to have a relationship with the elected leader of Israel. Now, a real leader, a real president, would say, look, it's time to put aside our differences, and we need to work together. We're allies on a common cause. Iran is building an atom bomb. Terrorism is accelerating. The Middle East is falling apart. We need to work together where we can to try to make the world a better place. But when you have such a deep ideological division and follow that, on top of that, a personal animus, which frankly, it looks to me, having talked to people on both sides, it really looks to me like Obama started that personal feud. Then you have an untenable situation. You have somebody who isn't acting like a leader, someone who's acting selfishly.
Because of his view on Israel, do you see it less likely that we'll have an October surprise attack on Iran, or do you think it's possible he sides with his own political survival in that situation?
Yeah, I think it does endanger his political survival, and we'll see. But it does. On the basis of present trends, it looks like Obama will get the lowest percentage of the Jewish vote than anybody since Jimmy Carter, which is really saying something. I mean, it could drop below 40%, which would make it much more difficult for him to carry certain states, including Florida and Ohio.
I was more asking, do you think we'll see a October surprise? What do you think the likelihood of us seeing an October surprise is, considering his attitude towards Israel? Do you think he wants to green light an attack on Iran with his reserves on Israel?
I think it's highly unlikely that you will see an attack on Iran from Obama unless he's forced into it, because it's unclear whether that would make the president more popular or less popular. Would it look a lot like the situation in which Bill Clinton, who was campaigning for the presidency in 1982 while he was governor of Arkansas, made a point of going back to execute Billy Ray Rector, who was a retarded man on death row. He went back to sign his death warrant to show he was tough, to show that he could order people to die. And that politically didn't work out for Bill Clinton like he thought it did. Fortunately for Bill Clinton, it was a short story. It didn't last for days and days. But it made him look tawdry. It made him look desperate. It made him look craven. And it didn't send the kind of message he wanted to send. And I think there's a parallel here. If Obama were to bomb Iran, it would look desperate. It would look like he was trying to win approval or reassure. It wouldn't be... These kind of October surprises only work if they're a natural extension of someone's character and record. It seems to be an add-on. It seems to be a mask you're putting on to win the moment. It doesn't work.
Our guest on the Black Tower Show, Richard Miniter, investigative journalist, author of 3 New York Times best-selling books, including Losing Bin Laden and Shadow War. I wanted to get your take on these recent protests. The one that's happening in Libya, obviously, is huge news. I wanted to get your thoughts on, do you think that these protests are a result of this film, or do you think that there is something more complex happening here?
Oh, of course they're not the result of the film. Let's not be naive, okay? Look, less than 10% of Egyptians have access to the internet at home. Less than 30% of Egyptians have access to the internet on their phones. And more importantly, when they do have access to the internet, they pay per minute to be online. So they don't have time to surf YouTube. And they certainly would surf sites in Arabic, not in English, which very few of them speak. So how did they see this film since they weren't watching it on YouTube? Now it gets interesting. The Salafis, who will make the Muslim Brotherhood look like moderates, broadcast it on Egyptian television and dubbed it into Arabic. The Salafis, the very people protesting, were the people who broadcasted all over Egypt.
All right.
They're trying to score political points against the Brotherhood and the government of Morsi and against America and establish themselves as the true voice of the street. We are not stars in this movie. We Americans are extras in this movie. They're making a political point against their rivals in Egypt. And this idea that it's all some internet film, that's an excuse. You know, if it really offended them, they wouldn't have dubbed it into Arabic and repeatedly broadcast it in Egypt in order to rile people up. They were looking for an excuse to have a showdown where they would force the current Egyptian government to choose between its American allies and the street. And either way, the government loses and the Salafis win.
We're being painted.
That's what's really happening.
We're being painted this picture by our media that this is a rejection of U.S. foreign policy. This is anger over the film. Is this just extremely lazy and sloppy reporting, or something more going on?
It's extremely lazy, and they're not asking basic questions. I mean, how is it they're upset about an internet video when so few of them have internet access, and or either they can't get online or they're simply not going to pay to surf? I mean, half of Egypt lives on $2 a day. You know, if you're living on $2 a day, are you spending, 30 cents a minute to surf the internet? By the way, this video is 11 minutes long. So would you not eat, not drink water in the desert for a day and a half so you can afford to watch this 11-minute video? Really? I mean, they're just not being skeptical.
Right. And they said that movie cost $5 million. It's like the most horribly produced movie I've ever seen in my life. They can't find the guy.
The guy doesn't exist, possibly?
He doesn't exist. The actors in the movie didn't even know that they were part of this film here.
This whole situation is ridiculous, really.
So wait, it's political, you're saying? Oh, that's a big surprise.
Yeah, it's political. They're trying to influence Egyptian politics. It's a fight between the Salafis and the Ikhwan, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's what it is.
So it's this call to you're going to side with, as you call them, the street people. So it's like a call to arms, maybe.
Well, when I say the street, I don't mean the homeless. I mean that's a generic term meaning those who demonstrate. Right? They call them the Arab street.
Right.
And the poor, the disenfranchised, and those who drive, frankly, our politics, for better or for worse.
So
the unemployed, students.
You've traveled all over the world. Are you currently still traveling and covering stories as we speak?
Yeah, I was in North Africa just a little over a month ago. I'm planning to go back shortly. I tend to take the view that if you don't go, you don't know. So it's important to spend time in the region, talk to ordinary people, listen, see, observe, read, absorb.
There you go. I'm coming with you. Actually, me and Jake are coming with you. We want to know what's happening at the outskirts of our empire. We want to know what's happening out there. Is it scary out there?
It is, and I wouldn't say that we have an empire.
It's not an empire. You're saying there's a few cracks in the armor or something?
Or more than a few.
More than a few cracks. Well, our guest on the Black Tower Show, Richard Miniter, investigative journalist, author of 3 New York Times best-selling books, including Losing Bin Laden and Shadow War. I'm joined by Jake Fox.
Before you go, Rich, I'd like to ask you to kind of look in your crystal ball a little bit and see, tell us what you think of what's going to happen over the Middle East in the next year or two, if you could.
Well, I think that Iran is going to continue to spread its wings and, as a result, try to drive us out of the Middle East. They're going to try to get control in Libya, in Tunisia. They have working control in Egypt now. They will broaden and deepen that control. They will try to get control in Yemen. They will try to hold on and probably do so in Syria, where they've killed some 15,000 people. And I would expect that the situation would darken considerably. I think the Obama administration is doing very little to make a meaningful difference. And I think they're letting down both the citizens of this country and the men and women of our armed forces by refusing to set a clear and concise and unmistakable line in foreign policy.
Right. Our guest, Richard Miniter, on the Black Tower Show. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. We'd love to have you back on in the future.
Thanks, guys. Happy to come back anytime.
Great. Take care now.